Cafe Luna, Seasons of Adventure, Volume 1, by Lux Lucerne. Chapter 1. Ring-a-ling sounded the bell as the door to Cafe Luna opened. A muscular man walked through, his hair shaved short and his beard outlining his mouth. A scar ran down his face over one of his eyes, and his hands were worn rugged. With a clap filled with pep, the young woman behind the counter turned around to welcome him. "Welcome to Cafe Luna," said Lunatya with a smile. "Oh, Roland, it's been quite a while, hasn't it?" "Aye, it has been. I've been traveling recently, so I haven't dropped by the cafe in some time," Roland replied. "How was your year of training across Plituvia? The gear I set you up with treating you well?" She raised an arm and patted her bicep with a proud nod. I've gotten a lot stronger. Adventuring on my own was quite the challenge, though having good equipment was reassuring." He sat down at the counter and nodded with relief. Good. Can't have anything I've made breaking on you." "From the armor to the bags to the cookware, everything was great," Lunatya praised, before stopping for a moment. She poked her belly. It was soft and jiggly. "My robes still fit well, even though I've been quite enjoying my culinary adventures as well." He let out a hearty laugh and grinned at her. "Don't you worry, Missy, I understand. I accounted for that when I was adjusting your equipment before you set off. Though feel free to swing by my shop if you need any adjustments." "Thanks, Roland. So what'll it be today? I'm sure you'd like to try out some of my new dishes," she said. She looked at him with intent, rating him. "Is the order the usual?" He closed his eyes with a smile and a nod. "I'd love to try out all your new dishes, but you already know how things are." "Coming right up. Welcome back, Roland," she said warmly, before trotting off to the kitchen with a pep in her step. When she returned, the cafe took on a rustic smell. The smell of butter and bacon, of warm bread. Roland took a deep breath as his mouth began to water. It felt like he had returned home. Somewhere warm, with good food and good company. Lunatya walked over behind the counter, carrying the platter of food. One by one, she placed the dishes in front of Roland. A glass of fresh orange juice, cold and bright. A plate with crispy fried bacon, golden brown home fries, and buttery scrambled eggs. A small dish with a stack of buttery toast, accompanied by a receptacle of ruby red strawberry jam. It was simple food, but prepared with care and plated neatly. "Here you go. Enjoy," she said, clapping her hands to the side with a smile. "Looks great," replied Roland. He rubbed his hands together and licked his lips, looking over the food with anticipation. He bowed his head for a moment before picking up his knife and fork. "Thank you for the meal." She held the platter to her chest and nodded her head before returning to the kitchen, leaving Roland to enjoy his meal. With the tinkling of cutlery on the plate, he cut and sampled his meal bit by bit. The eggs were buttery and creamy, the home fries crisp on the outside, with a smooth, creamy center, enveloped with the taste of garlic and herbs. The bacon was crisp and savory, with a saltiness that whets your thirst. Roland took up his glass and took a swig. The juice was sweet and tangy, bright like the sun and cool as the rain. Then he brought together the individual parts of his meal on his fork. A piece of potato, followed by egg, then bacon. He ate it together in one bite, and the flavors and textures melded together to create something beautiful. The salt of the bacon heightens the flavors of the herbed home fries. The herbs melded with the butteriness of the eggs, and the creaminess of the eggs, bringing it all together. Another sip of juice, refreshing as rain on a hot day in summer. Lunatya returned shortly, and with a click of her heels, she settled behind the counter again, holding her hands together delicately over her skirt. "How is it?" Enjoying your food? She inquired. Roland looked up, giving her a jolly nod and thumbs up. Delicious. It's just what I needed. I feel more alive already, he replied. I'm glad. A nice homey meal is just the thing to have after traveling, she said, tilting her head to the side with a smile. Roland nodded. Nothing quite like it, is there? He took a bite of home fries, the crisp outside giving way to the smooth, creamy center. The food I ate while traveling through Faventi was good, even while camping out along the trails. It was never quite as satisfying as eating here. Eating here is good for the soul. Lunatya shifted, realizing where he had been traveling. How are things in Faventi? It's been a while since I've last visited. Well, you know how it is over there. With the villages so spread out, monsters are always a problem. The capital Old-Floor has gotten bigger, and I hear the Knights Verdant are spread thin, Roland detailed. He looked into his glass of juice and swirled it. The main roads and major towns are pretty safe, but the further out you go, the rougher it gets. The outlier villages rely on adventurers more, don't they? Said Lunatya. Aye, the Knights Verdant are good folks, though there's only so much space they can cover, so the villages turn to the adventurers. They don't have much gold, so normally they offer services and trade instead. Adventurers bring safety to the village and gather monster materials, where the village gives them a place to stay and crafting services to make equipment, he said in return. Then he grinned. And when you go to places like this, you get the first pick of all the monster materials that are gathered. You're always on the lookout for materials to craft unique weapons and armor, aren't you, Roland? Did you get anything good this time? Lunatya asked, smiling. Plenty of good quality mundane materials. The usual stuff like ores, hides, and wood, he replied. Though my best find this trip was probably gale-wing hawk materials. Those birds have a wingspan twice the size of a man's and can summon gusts of wind that launch feathers like arrows. Their beak and their claws are hard as iron, but light as can be. I managed to get a bit of everything. He scraped the plate with his knife, pushing food onto his fork. He took another bite and swallowed. He tapped his knife on the plate, thinking. His mind traced back along his travels through Faventi. The lush forests, leaves rustling in the wind, the rolling meadows filled with life and color, petals soaring in the air, carrying with them a melody of smells. The wide open skies of Azure, dappled with soaring wings of birds above. What a big bird! I wonder if I could ride one. Oh, those materials sound like good stuff, Lunatya said, imagining a big, friendly bird. I'm sure those feathers would be good for arrows or even a cloak. What do you plan to use with the claws, though? I'm not sure yet. I could make a nice pair of gauntlets or boots with them. Oh, I could melt them down and alloy them to make a light and strong metal called silverwind. It takes on a lustrous sheen and has a natural affinity for wind, Roland muttered as he chewed with his eyes closed, rubbing his chin. He had but a small portion of his bacon, eggs, and potato waiting to be eaten together. Lunatya looked at the window somewhere far away. I think I know someone who would be interested in commissioning some gear with those materials. I wonder when he'll be back. I think I know who you're talking about, Roland said, looking up at her. They'll be back soon enough, I'm sure. The winds will guide him back to you, don't you worry. Maybe keep those materials on the side for him, Lunatya said, still somewhere far off. I remember him mentioning wanting some defensive equipment like a shield, but less cumbersome. Of course, your family and close associates always get first pick. My life would be very different were it not for your mother and father, Roland affirmed. He looked into his glass, remembering. Sometimes the scar over his eye would still burn. His leg that was crushed still ached. The shroud of death that nearly overtook him all those years ago. Dark veil, all-consuming. He threw back his head and took a big gulp. It was still cool and refreshing, soothing his soul. Lunatya snapped back to the cafe, focused. I know, Roland, I know. I think this life suits you well, though. You really have a good eye for materials and a hand for smithing, she said, smiling softly. She put a hand on her chest. A lot of adventurers rely on your gear, knowing it won't break when they need it most, myself included. Thanks, Lunatya. Means a lot to hear that. I learned the hard way that preparation is vital for adventurers. You need gear you can count on. He nodded as he closed his eyes, his eyebrows pulling in tight. He took a deep breath, then let go, the tension fading. Well, speaking about materials, I picked up a gourmet material that might interest you. I know you have a sweet tooth. Sweets, you say? Tell me more. Lunatya said as she leaned in, a shine in her eyes. I've got some feathers from a honey hummingbird. They dart around the lush meadows of Faventi, flower to flower, drinking up lots of nectar. They get quite plump and round, and the feathers along their front are soaked in sugars, almost like a bib of golden honey, Roland described. You can use the feathers themselves as honey spoons for tea, or as a tool to add sweet etchings to baked goods. And don't worry, these feathers were shed. They dropped off when they get too sugary. Oh, those little birdies sound cute, Lunatya said, clapping her hands to her cheeks. Those feathers do sound quite handy. I think I'd like some. What else can you do with them? I'll reserve you a bundle of them, then. Pick them up next time you're by the shop, said Roland, wagging a finger. I could perhaps fashion a knife with it. It might make a nice paring knife for fruit. Give the fruit a bit of a sugary glaze to prevent them from browning after you cut them. Oh, that sounds great. Make that. Lunatya cheered as she held her hands to her chest and nodded with excitement. A knife that practically candies fruit sounds lovely. Now get to work on that, then. It should be ready in a few days, Roland replied. He put down his knife and fork for a moment and stared at her. Oh, don't worry, she said with a laugh. Once I make something with it, I'll send some treats your way, too. He nodded with a smile. He smacked his lips together, imagining the delicious food to be had. The only other notable material I picked up in Faventi is some spirit wood. It has a special property where items made from the same tree can be linked together. If you focus on it, it can lead you to the other items linked to it, said Roland. That material is quite rare, isn't it? Where'd you manage to find some? Lunatya asked. I took a trip to Spirit's Hollow in the Vesper Woods, Roland replied. It said a ley line runs through the forest, making it a place of power. Spirits trickle up and take residence in the trees, not to mention all the undead and such that wander the woods themselves. She had heard of the Vesper Woods before. It was a dangerous place far to the south of Faventi. The forest canopy was thick, blocking out the sun. Monsters creeping through the dark, the crunch of branches, the call of ravens. Even the trees themselves were against you, shifting and changing to disorient unsuspecting prey. The souls of the unrestful dead wandered there, bound by vengeance, as did all manner of shambling undead, hungering for the vitality of the living. Lunatya shifted uncomfortably as she leaned against the back counter, gripping its edge. It's quite a dangerous place, isn't it? Hear any rumors when you were visiting Spirit's Hollow? Lunatya asked, again looking out somewhere far away. The greater the risk, the greater the reward. But it's a remote and dangerous region. As for rumors, Roland thought for a moment. He picked up his plate and shoveled the last of his meal into his mouth. He chewed, enjoying the rich, savory flavors. Then he put the plate back down. Well, other than the Knights Verdant having issues lately all over Faventi, I did hear a story of an attack on Spirit's Hollow recently. It wasn't what she had expected. Oh, she continued to listen, still looking out the window. Oh, what happened there? From what I heard, an elite threat undead had wandered near the village and captured several people. They called it a soul storm, like a dust devil of vengeful spirits that sweep you up and drain you of your life. Normally they'd have adventurers just face unruly undead head on, but since they had captured some folks, can't just go blasting in with fireballs, Roland recounted. Sounds terrible. Lunatya shook her head. She closed her eyes and felt sorrow welling up. Worries and anxieties grasped at her. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. So what happened then? Did someone manage to rescue them? Spirit's Hollow was in quite a buzz. Supposedly a young paladin had managed to not only defeat the monster, but save all the people as well, Roland said. Remembering the people's excitement, he grinned. They said he fought that monster for 3 days and 3 nights. A paladin, whispered Lunatya. She perked up. Did you hear his name? That's part of their excitement. He wouldn't tell them his name. All he would say was that he was an adventurer on a journey, and he happened to be there at the right time, said Roland, as he waved his hands in the air. But the townsfolk needed something to call him, so they gave him an epithet. The Gale-Bleed Knight. Could it have been? Lunatya muttered. She stared at Roland with wide eyes. He returned with a shrug, hands in the air, then with a smile. So what happened after? Was he all right? Lunatya asked with anticipation. I heard he passed out as soon as he defeated the monster and confirmed everyone was safe. They took him to the inn and tended to his injuries. And when he woke up, he got a hero's welcome. The townsfolk wanted to put together something for some compensation for him as well. Adventurers don't work without pay, you know, said Roland, wagging a finger. But all he asked for was for food and a place to stay, to rest for a few days. It's good he was okay. Sounds like it was quite the encounter, she said, letting out a sigh. Certainly sounded like it, said Roland, as he nodded in agreement, before moving his plate out of the way. It was delicious. Thank you, Lunatya. You're welcome. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Let me get that out of the way so you can enjoy your toast, she said, smiling. She picked up his plate and took it back into the kitchen, the heels of her shoes clicking against the floor of the cafe. Roland rubbed his hands together and slid the plate of toast in front of him. He took a scoop of ruby-red strawberry jam and accompanied it with his knife. It glistened in the light. Gingerly took a slice of toast off from the top of the stack. It was still warm and crisp. He was about to glaze it with jam, but he noticed something. He put the knife back down. Leaning his elbows onto the table, he held that piece of toast in front of him and just stared at it until Lunatya returned. Is the toast okay, Roland? She said with trepidation. That's quite the look you're giving it. You know, Lunatya, all the years I've been coming here after your parents helped me get back on my feet, no matter who made my food, whether it was your father Oberon, your mother Edelyn, or you, even when you were young, the toast was always buttered to the edge. Not once was it not. You and your family always took that extra bit of effort in the details of food. Love is the secret ingredient, that makes food special. And love is in the details, Roland said, looking at the toast with sorrow in his eyes. He put the toast down and looked at her. On the outside, she seemed her normal, happy, pleasant self, a joy to be around with a smile that lit up the room. But when he looked with more care, he saw her smile did not reach her eyes. They were somewhere far off, filled with worry, perhaps a bit red and misty. Something happened, didn't it? Roland said, realizing. He shook his head, and his eyes grew damp. Lunatya stood there behind the counter, still smiling. She held her hands together neatly across her belly, still standing at attention. But her eyes couldn't lie. They were downcast. Blue eyes like that of a sea of sorrow, lost in the rain. That's why you were asking about rumors, wasn't it? Stated Roland. The cracking of ice, the shattering of glass. Lunatya couldn't keep the mask on any longer. She clenched her chest as all the anxieties and worries started to grasp at her again. Thoughts like a dark tide washing over you, pulling you down, strangling you. It is always the saddest people that try so desperately to make others happy. As they know what it feels like to be drowning in despair. So they give everything they can so no one else experiences that. She always tries to smile, no matter how exhausted she was. She wanted those around her to be happy and to have hope, because that's what gave her hope. But this was too much. She's only human. I'm so worried, Lunatya said, choking on her own words. I don't want to be all alone. I don't want to lose anyone else. Roland bit his lip as he closed his eyes, his face straining. He realized that's why the cafe was so quiet. Something happened in Faventi. Lunatya was all alone. I can't do much. But I'm here for you, Lunatya, Roland whispered. Your family's always taken good care of me. It's time the caretaker is tended to. Come, take a seat. She sniffled. Her hand was shaking as she clenched her chest. Those shining blue eyes were forlorn, moistened by rain. She nodded her head and shuffled around the corner. Without a sound, she sat down next to Roland. Roland picked up his knife again. Toast still buttery, crisp, and warm. He glazed a piece with ruby red strawberry jam. It shone in the light and gave off a sweet smell. Glazed with care, right to the edge. He held it out to her. Thank you, she said with a sniffle. She took a nibble out of the corner, the crust making a crisp noise as she bit into it. The thin layer of jam was bright and fruity, complementing the rich butter flavor of the toast. Food is best shared with others, isn't it? Roland said gently, glazing a piece of toast for himself. It is, whispered Lunatya with a sniffle. Bit by bit, nibble by nibble, her toast grew smaller and smaller. It's the best thing in the world. You're never truly alone, Lunatya, Roland said. He took a big bite out of his slice of toast. It was buttery, crisp, warm, sweet and fruity, simple, but deeply satisfying. It brought him back to when Lunatya's parents first helped him, when his hope was renewed, when all had been lost. The bonds you share with those you love are unbreakable. You're right. But it's hard not to worry, Lunatya said. She stuffed the rest of her toast into her mouth, cheeks puffed up. She sniffled and talked with her mouth full. You know how my mother was always here, and one day she vanished. My father still won't tell me what happened then. I remember, Roland said. His face grimaced in remembrance. He glazed another piece of toast and held it off to the side without looking. Lunatya accepted it and took big bites out of it, between labored sniffles. Tears ran down her face in streams. Roland glazed a piece for himself. He did the same. This was the first thing your parents had made for me, after my adventuring days were put to an end. They saved me after I had been injured while on a quest, and invited me to come by the cafe sometime, Roland whispered. Facing death like that made me lose faith. Faith in myself. Faith in my vision. I lost who I was. Lunatya slowed down, munching on her toast as she listened. Roland was an old family friend, and she knew what had happened. Oh, she had never heard it from himself. They healed my soul. I was a broken man, and they helped me find a new purpose, continued Roland. He held a hand over his heart and closed his eyes. The vision he held there, steady as stone, was like the golden repair of broken pottery. It showed me that I could help people in a way no one else could. I could protect people with my craft, so no one else would have to feel the abyss of despair, witnessing your vision, spark, or equipment shattering when you need it most. Roland pulled out a necklace that was tucked under his shirt. It was a small shield inlaid with a yellow gem. There were cracks throughout it all, but those cracks were filled with a gentle light, shining like gold. That day I walked into Cafe Luna for the first time was the day my vision was renewed. Your parents made breakfast and shared a meal with me, said Roland. He took another bite of his toast and savored the flavor, sweet, buttery, and bright. The food was simple, but prepared with care. We didn't talk about anything in particular. I think I ended up just letting out everything that was in my heart. Cafe Luna has always been a place of warmth and safety, a safe haven for the lost. Well, I certainly feel lost right now, muttered Lunatya. We all do sometimes, especially when the times are bad. Now don't forget, the bonds you share with those you love are unbreakable, Roland replied. He looked her in the eye, resolute and stern. All the things they've taught you, all the beautiful things in the world they've shown you, and the food you've shared with them around the table. These are all proof of their existence, all proof of the time you shared, all proof of your bond. He put a hand on her shoulder. It was firm, though warm and gentle. Those bonds will guide them back to you. Don't you worry, Roland said in a quiet, lulling voice. Everything will be okay.